You ever dealt with an HOA so drunk on power that they think they own the neighborhood? Well, let me tell you about the time an HOA Karen tried to evict me, without knowing I was actually her landlord. And trust me, it did not end well for her. This story starts with me moving into what I thought was going to be a peaceful, upscale neighborhood. You know, white picket fences, quiet streets, neighbors who mind their business. But there was one problem: the homeowners association. Or more specifically, its president, Karen. What is the nastiest things you have witnessed or heard HOA done? Comment, like, and subscribe to support this channel. Now, when I say Karen, I mean the textbook definition of an HOA tyrant. The type of woman who patrols the streets with a clipboard, looking for any excuse to slap you with a fine. The kind who makes up rules on the spot just to feel powerful. And unfortunately for me, she had no idea who she was dealing with. When I first moved in, I didn't even register on Karen's radar. My house was pristine, my lawn was perfectly manicured, and I kept to myself. Nothing for her to nitpick. Or so I thought. One morning, about a week after settling in, I stepped outside to grab my mail. That's when I spotted her, Karen, standing at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her nose like a discount FBI agent. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice dripping with that forced politeness people use when they're about to ruin your day. "Are you aware that trash bins must be moved by 6 a.m. sharp? Yours was still out at 6:15. I blinked. 6 a.m.? Who even enforces that? I turned and looked at my trash bin, which wasn't even mine. The wind must have blown my neighbor's bin slightly onto my side of the driveway. That's not mine," I said, pointing toward my actual bin neatly tucked away. Karen pursed her lips like she'd sucked on a lemon. "Well, as a homeowner, it's your responsibility to maintain the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. Consider this a verbal warning." And with that, she strutted off like she just did the world a favor. That was my first red flag. But I let it slide. Big mistake. A week later, I found an envelope taped to my door. HOA notice. Fine, $75. The reason? Grass height exceeding HOA standards. I frowned and went outside to check. My lawn was freshly mowed, shorter than some of my neighbors even. But when I compared my property to Karen's, her lawn was noticeably overgrown. I shook my head, deciding to contest the fine. I called the HOA office, only to be met with a robotic voice. "All complaints must be submitted in writing. HOA rulings are final." I sighed and paid the fine, figuring it wasn't worth the headache. Another big mistake. Because the moment I paid, the floodgates opened. The next week, $50 fine for unauthorized mailbox design. The week after that, $100 fine for vehicle parked facing the wrong direction. Then, $200 fine for unsanctioned exterior decorations. Each time, I'd look around the neighborhood and see other people doing the exact same things I was fined for. The difference? They weren't on Karen's hit list. By now, I knew I was being targeted. But I had no idea just how far Karen was willing to go. It all came to a head one Saturday morning. I was in my backyard enjoying a coffee when I heard a sharp knock on my front door. The kind of knock that tells you someone is about to ruin your day. I opened the door to find Karen, 2 HOA board members, and a security guard. "Mr. Johnson," she said, a sickeningly smug smile on her face. "I regret to inform you that due to repeated HOA violations and unpaid fines, you are being evicted from this neighborhood. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." I stared at her, trying to process what she just said. Evicted. From my own home. I let out a short laugh, thinking this had to be a joke. "I'm sorry, what? Evicted by who?" Karen's smile widened as she handed me a stack of official-looking papers. "By order of the HOA, your continued disregard for our community's standards has left us no choice. This neighborhood does not tolerate rule breakers." She actually expected me to panic. To beg. To cower. But she had no idea. I was the worst person she could have pulled this stunt on. I took the eviction notice, looked it over, and then I laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a confused chuckle. A full-on, uncontrollable laugh. Karen's smile faltered. "I don't see what's funny about this, Mr. Johnson." I wiped a tear from my eye and shook my head. "Karen, do you know who actually owns this neighborhood?" Her face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about?" I stepped forward, lowering my voice just enough to make her nervous. "I own it, Karen." Silence. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. "I'm the majority shareholder of the development company that built this entire neighborhood. Every single house in this HOA? I own the land beneath them. Including yours." Karen's face went pale. One of the HOA board members gasped audibly. The security guard took an awkward step back. I leaned against my doorframe and smirked. So tell me, Karen, how exactly do you plan to evict your landlord? Last time Karen thought she had won. She tried to evict me from my own home, convinced she held all the power. But what she didn't know is that I own the entire neighborhood. And when I dropped that truth bomb, let's just say she wasn't ready for what came next. Her hands trembled. This has to be fake, she stammered, scanning the documents. One of the HOA board members, Mr. Reynolds, snatched the papers from her, his face turning pale as he read through them. Karen, he muttered, his voice shaking. These are real. Karen's jaw clenched so tight I thought she might snap a tooth. She looked at me like I had just ruined her entire life. And she was right. But instead of admitting defeat, Karen did something that changed everything. She laughed. Karen straightened up, shaking off her initial panic like a snake shedding its skin. The fear in her eyes vanished, replaced with something else. Smugness. She smoothed down her blazer, crossed her arms, and tilted her head at me. So what? She said, her voice eerily calm. You own the land. Big deal. That doesn't mean you can just waltz in and dismantle the HOA. We have contracts. We have legal power. You may think you've won, but let's see what the courts have to say about it. She turned to the board members. And as for you all, I hope you're smart enough to stick with me on this. Because if we go down, we all go down. That's when I knew she wasn't just some petty HOA tyrant. She was hiding something. And whatever it was, it had the rest of the HOA board terrified. That night, I decided to do something I hadn't before. Dig deeper. If Karen was this desperate to keep control, then there was more to the story. I started making calls. Lawyers, county offices, real estate records. And within hours I found something unsettling. The HOA had been running an illegal scam for years. See, normally HOA fees go toward maintenance, landscaping, community upkeep, right? Not here. Karen and her little group had been pocketing a huge chunk of those fees, thousands of dollars every year. Not only that, but they had been forging violations, inflating fines, and illegally repossessing homes, just like they tried to do to me. And the worst part? At least 3 other homeowners had mysteriously lost their houses after refusing to pay ridiculous fines. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was a full-blown fraudster. And it was time to end this once and for all. I had everything I needed. Bank records. Fake violation reports. Eviction notices signed under false pretenses. But instead of going straight to the police, I went to the one place that would destroy Karen instantly. The HOA community meeting. Now you have to understand, HOA meetings are usually boring. But not this one. I walked in with a thick folder of evidence and made sure to arrive late, just as Karen was in the middle of one of her classic power speeches. And that's why I believe we need even stricter enforcement. Some homeowners have been blatantly ignoring rules, and if we don't crack down, this neighborhood will turn into chaos, she declared, waving her clipboard. That's when I stepped forward. Speaking of enforcement, Karen, I think everyone here should know exactly what you've been up to. The room went dead silent. Karen's face twitched just a little. Excuse me, she said, forcing a smile. I pulled out the first document and held it up. This is a copy of a fake violation you sent to one of our neighbors, fining them for a non-existent infraction. Here's another. And another. You've been fining people for made-up reasons and pocketing the money. A few gasps. People started murmuring. I took out another sheet. Oh, and this? These are bank statements showing thousands of dollars being funneled from HOA fees, straight into your personal account. Karen's smile dropped. The murmurs turned into full-blown outrage. I wasn't done. And this is a list of homeowners who lost their properties under your leadership, after being hit with endless fines until they couldn't fight back anymore. Sound familiar? Karen's face turned red. One of the board members stood up. Karen, is this true? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She was cornered. Then she snapped. With the entire room staring her down, Karen lost it. She slammed her clipboard onto the table. You think you can take me down? She screeched. People backed away. I built this HOA. I made this community what it is. You think you can just walk in here and tear it apart? She turned on me, pointing a shaking finger. This is all your fault. If you had just followed the rules. Security stepped in. I crossed my arms. What rules, Karen? The ones you made up. That's when the police arrived. See, I had already sent copies of my evidence to law enforcement. As Karen stood there, breathing heavily, wild-eyed, sweating, 2 officers walked up. Karen Thompson? She turned. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and illegal property seizures. Please place your hands behind your back." The room exploded into whispers and gasps. Karen froze. Then she started laughing. Maniacally. "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. I run this place," she screamed. One of the officers gave her a flat look. "Not anymore." The cuffs clicked shut. And just like that, the queen of the HOA was dethroned. Karen was finished. Or at least that's what I thought. I mean, she got dragged out in cuffs. Case closed, right? Wrong. Because what happened next? That was when the HOA's real nightmare began. Unknown number, you think you won? You have no idea what you've started. I felt a chill run down my spine. Karen was gone, but her corruption wasn't. I expected the HOA to crumble after her arrest, but instead, it doubled down. At first, it started subtly. Emails from the HOA board. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be increasing HOA fees to cover legal expenses related to recent events." New violations. "Your trash bins were seen out past 8 a.m. Fine, $150. Your grass is 0.2 inches taller than HOA regulations. Fine, $250. The board wasn't going down quietly. They were scrambling to survive and making homeowners pay for it. The worst part? They were still trying to evict me. I walked into my mailbox one morning and found a fresh eviction notice. Failure to comply with HOA standards. Final warning. Vacate the premises within 7 days. They weren't just fighting back. They were waging war. I knew something wasn't right. Karen had been arrested. The fraud was exposed. So how was the HOA still operating like nothing happened? That's when I realized Karen was never working alone. She had people on the inside. And one of them was still pulling the strings. So I did what any sane person would do. I set up hidden cameras. I planted them around the HOA office, in the common areas, even near my mailbox. And what I found, it was worse than I imagined. It was 2 a.m. when I got an alert on my phone. Motion detected, inside the HOA office. I pulled up the live feed, and my stomach dropped. 3 people, sitting in the dark, whispering. I zoomed in. Mr. Reynolds, the same board member who looked terrified when Karen was arrested. Cynthia Grayson, the treasurer who had signed off on all those fraudulent fines. And someone I didn't recognize. A man in a suit, clean-cut, serious like a lawyer or something worse. I turned up the volume. "We need to move fast," the man said. "Karen's gone, but that doesn't mean this operation stops. We need to shift the money before investigators get too deep." Mr. Reynolds wiped sweat off his forehead. "I told you this is getting too risky. Maybe we should just..." The man slammed his fist on the table. "You think Karen was the problem? No, she was just the face. This HOA is bigger than her. And if we go down, you're going down first." My heart was racing. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was organized. A scam that had been running for years. And I had just uncovered its second layer. I needed evidence. More than just recordings. So the next night I did something dangerous. I broke into the HOA office. I knew the security code. Karen had barked it at the maintenance guy one too many times. The office was dark, but I had one goal: find those hidden accounts. I booted up the HOA computer and started digging. And then, footsteps. Outside. I froze. Someone was coming. The doorknob twisted. And just as it started to open, I pressed myself against the cool, cluttered desk, my breath shallow and rapid. Every instinct screamed that my cover was blown. In the dim light cast by a single desk lamp, I strained to see the silhouette advancing through the doorway. A moment of paralyzing uncertainty held me captive until the figure emerged from the shadows. A man in a crisp suit stood at the threshold. His face was partially obscured by the collar of his jacket, and his eyes glimmered in the low light. My heart pounded as I considered my options: fight, flee, or try to reason with him. Before I could decide, he halted, scanning the room as if searching for someone. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke in a low, almost hesitant voice. "I know you're here." His words made my pulse spike even further. How could he know? Had he been monitoring my every move? I remained silent, straining to catch every nuance of his tone. Slowly, he stepped further into the light. With deliberate care, he removed the hood that had partially concealed his features. The man before me was the very same one I had seen in the secret meeting. A figure I'd pegged as one of the conspirators orchestrating the HOA's fraud. But now, his eyes held something different, an expression that teetered between urgency and regret. "Listen," he said softly, his tone measured and almost pleading, "I'm not here to harm you. I need to talk. My grip tightened on the edge of the desk. I couldn't tell if I should trust him or brace for an attack. Every instinct reminded me that in a situation like this, no one was ever truly what they seemed. But something in his voice, a trace of sincerity, made me pause. Before I could respond, a sudden, sharp noise startled both of us. The door behind him swung open with a heavy thud. I jerked my head around, heart hammering, to see another figure step into the room. This new arrival was one of the HOA board members, his face etched with panic and confusion. His eyes darted between the man in the suit and me. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice trembling as he clutched a set of documents close to his chest. The suited man glanced at the board member with a mix of urgency and exasperation. "You need to let him go. There's more at stake than any one of us here." The board member's eyes widened as he took a hesitant step forward. "But, this isn't how we handle internal disputes. We can't just—" His words were cut short by a sudden harsh clatter from the far side of the room. A crash echoed through the office as a metal filing cabinet toppled over. In that split second, the suited man jerked his head towards the noise. I followed his gaze and saw that the back door had been forced open. Shadows shifted ominously as another figure emerged, a figure whose identity was shrouded in darkness. My mind raced with questions. Who was this new arrival? Had the entire board been infiltrated? The suited man's expression hardened as he muttered, "We're running out of time." His urgency was palpable, and he stepped forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm not your enemy," he continued. "I was once part of this operation. I helped set it up. But I never meant for it to go this far. Now I'm trying to fix it, if you'll let me." I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. This man, whose loyalty was once with the corrupt HOA machinery, now claimed to be turning against them. But could I trust him? Was he simply buying time until he could cover his tracks? The board member, still clutching his documents, took a defensive stance. "Who are you to decide what's right? You were in on this scheme. You know as well as I do that things aren't always black and white." Before the suited man could reply, the new figure at the back of the room stepped into the light, a tall woman with steely determination in her eyes. She looked familiar, yet I couldn't place her. Her presence radiated authority, and even in the dim glow, I could see that she was no ordinary intruder. "Stop," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Everyone calm down." Her tone was not one of surrender but of command, and for a moment, the room fell into a heavy silence. The board member's hand trembled as he lowered his documents, and the suited man shifted his weight uncertainly. The woman locked eyes with the suited man. "You," she said sharply, "I thought you'd been neutralized after the meeting. Why are you here?" The man hesitated. "I came to warn you," he replied, glancing around as if expecting an ambush. "There's another force at work, someone manipulating everything from behind the scenes. I've seen transactions, hidden accounts. This scam is even bigger than Karen ever imagined." My mind spun with the implications. The layers of deceit seemed to multiply with every word. I realized I was caught in a web that extended far beyond Karen's petty abuse of power. This wasn't just about inflated fines or wrongful evictions. It was about a sophisticated scheme that had ensnared numerous unsuspecting homeowners. The mysterious woman frowned. "And who exactly is pulling the strings?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing as she stepped closer to the suited man. He hesitated before answering. "I can't say their name. All I know is that they operate in the shadows, and if I reveal too much, well, I'm not the only one who will pay the price." A chill ran down my spine. The conversation had taken an unexpected turn. This was no longer just an internal conflict among crooked board members. There was an external, unknown adversary orchestrating everything, and now it threatened to expose everyone involved. Before any of us could process this new information, a sudden flash of light erupted from the hallway outside the office. The sound of raised voices filtered in, angry shouts and the unmistakable clamor of a struggle. The suited man and the mysterious woman exchanged a look that conveyed both urgency and dread. "They've found us," the suited man whispered urgently, eyes wide with alarm. "We need to move. Now." The board members' panic intensified. "We can't just run. The evidence, all of this, it'll be lost if we don't secure it immediately." His words tumbled out in a frantic rush. I glanced around, torn between the need to hide and the urge to escape. Every moment that ticked by seemed to heighten the stakes. I realized that whatever was happening outside was directly linked to our confrontation in this very room. Someone or something had been alerted to our presence. The mysterious woman grabbed a small envelope from her pocket. A sealed packet containing what looked like hard drives and additional documents. "This is everything," she said. "It's our last card. If we can get it to the authorities before they round us up, we might actually stop this operation for good." My heart pounded. The gravity of the situation was now undeniable. I glanced at the suited man and the board member, each of whom wore expressions that oscillated between fear and resolve. Every minute here increased the risk of everything unraveling. As I inched towards a side exit, the door burst open with a force that sent papers flying across the room. Several figures, clad in dark uniforms and armed with flashlights, stormed in. Their arrival was swift and precise, a coordinated effort that left no room for negotiation. I ducked behind the desk, holding my breath as chaos erupted around me. The suited man and the mysterious woman exchanged a final, silent look, a wordless plea to trust that this wasn't the end. The board member, caught between loyalty and self-preservation, muttered something unintelligible as he backed away. One of the uniformed figures barked, "Hands up! Nobody move!" The room filled with a tense mix of shouts and the scrape of boots against the floor. In that charged moment, the envelope in the mysterious woman's hand slipped from her grasp, skittering across the floor towards my hiding spot. I knew that envelope was the key, the final piece of evidence that could bring down the entire corrupt operation. Before I could retrieve it, a hand gripped my shoulder hard enough to make me flinch. I turned slowly to face a masked face shrouded in darkness. The figure's voice was muffled, yet it carried a tone of finality. "You're not going anywhere." The muffled sounds of struggle echo through the dimly lit room. My breath comes in short gasps as a firm hand grips my shoulder. The masked figure looms over me, his voice carrying a chilling finality. "You're not going anywhere." My mind raced. Every escape plan I had was crumbling fast. The envelope, the key to unraveling the entire scheme, lay just inches away, but reaching for it now was suicide. The suited man, the mysterious woman, and the panicked board member were all frozen, their gazes locked on the armed intruders. "Hands where we can see them," one of the figures barked. I felt the pressure on my shoulder ease slightly as my captor shifted his stance. His grip loosened almost imperceptibly. It was then that I realized something crucial. He wasn't squeezing hard enough to restrain me. It was a signal. A warning. Without thinking, I let my body go limp, feigning compliance. My knees buckled, and as I staggered forward, I made my move. My foot swept across the floor, knocking the envelope closer to my reach. In the same instant, the suited man lunged toward one of the intruders, throwing a punch that sent the room into chaos. Shouts erupted. The air filled with the sharp clatter of a chair toppling over and the thud of bodies colliding. The suited man fought with desperation, while the mysterious woman grabbed a paperweight and swung it hard at one of the masked figures, buying us a few seconds. I seized the moment. My fingers closed around the envelope, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. But before I could shove it into my jacket, someone snatched my wrist. I spun around, expecting another attacker, but it wasn't one of them. It was the board member. His face was twisted with something between fear and regret. "Give it to me," he hissed. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." I yanked my arm back. "Neither do you." The power struggle lasted a fraction of a second, but that was all it took. A shot rang out. Everything stopped. The noise, the fighting, even the air itself seemed to freeze. My gaze snapped toward the suited man, who stood rigid, eyes wide with shock. A dark stain spread across his chest. The mysterious woman gasped, catching him as he staggered. "No, no, stay with me," she muttered, pressing her hands against the wound. The masked figures didn't react. They didn't move to attack again. Instead, one of them, taller than the rest, with an unsettling calmness, stepped forward. "Enough," he said. His voice was smooth, controlled. This was someone used to power. Someone who didn't need to shout to command a room. I clenched my jaw. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the question. "I'm the reason you're in this mess." A chill crawled down my spine. His tone was almost casual, like he had been expecting this moment. Like we were all playing a game whose ending had already been written. "You think Karen was the problem?" he continued, stepping closer. "She was just a puppet. A loud, obnoxious distraction. The real work happens in the shadows." I tightened my grip on the envelope. "And what work is that, exactly?" The man's smile was slow, deliberate. "Why don't you let me show you?" Before I could respond, the lights cut out. The room plunged into darkness. Screams. A struggle. The sound of hurried footsteps. Then silence. When the emergency backup lights flickered on, half the room was empty. The masked figures were gone. So was the suited man's body. The only thing left was the envelope in my trembling hands, and the terrifying realization that this conspiracy went far deeper than I had ever imagined. I stood frozen, my fingers gripping the envelope so tightly that the edges crumpled beneath my touch. The room was eerily silent, except for the faint hum of the emergency lights overhead. My brain struggled to process what had just happened. 1 second we were in chaos, fighting for our lives. The next, the masked figures and the suited man's body had vanished into thin air. I wasn't alone. The mysterious woman was still here, eyes darting between me and the envelope. The board member, looking as if he had seen a ghost, took a step back, his face pale as a sheet. "We need to leave," the woman whispered. I didn't move. "Not until I see what's inside this." My hands shook as I peeled back the seal. The paper felt thick, expensive, like something important people used for official documents. My stomach twisted into knots as I unfolded the contents. At first it looked like legal jargon, HOA amendments, fine structures, signatures. But as my eyes scanned the pages, something stood out. There were payments. Huge amounts of money being funneled into accounts that shouldn't have existed. One name appeared over and over again. Karen. But not just Karen. There were others. HOA presidents from different neighborhoods. Board members. Even a local judge. A network. I felt a chill creep up my spine. This wasn't about a petty HOA dispute. This was an empire, an operation designed to exploit homeowners through shady fines, illegal property seizures, and financial blackmail. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were stealing houses. The woman exhaled sharply as she read over my shoulder. "This is bigger than we thought." The board member let out a shaky breath. His eyes darted around like a trapped animal. "I told you, you don't understand what you're dealing with." I turned to him, my voice like steel. "Then explain it." He hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, he said something that made my blood run cold. "Karen was supposed to be the fall guy." I narrowed my eyes. "What?" "She thought she was in charge," he continued. "But they set her up. She was never meant to last. They needed someone loud, aggressive, someone who would take all the heat when things went south. And it worked. You focused on her while the real players kept working behind the scenes." My hands clenched into fists. That meant... Before I could finish the thought, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "You should stop digging." The voice was smooth, confident. The same voice that had spoken before the lights went out. "You think you've won something?" the man continued. "You haven't. You have a choice. Walk away now or lose everything." My pulse thundered in my ears. "I don't scare easily." The man chuckled softly. "Oh, but you should." Then the line went dead. A sharp knock on the door made all three of us jump. 3 slow, deliberate taps. We weren't alone. The 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoed through the room, sending a jolt of tension up my spine. We weren't alone. The woman's eyes locked onto mine, her breathing shallow. The board members, still trembling, looked ready to bolt. I didn't move. Another knock. Then silence. I took a step toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to be ready for anything. My fingers tightened around the envelope of damning evidence. If they were here to silence us, they were too late. I knew the truth now. With a slow, steady breath, I reached for the handle and yanked the door open. Empty hallway. But something was different. The lighting seemed off. Like the bulbs had been replaced with something dimmer, more artificial. I stepped forward cautiously, scanning both directions. No one. Then I noticed it. A small envelope on the floor. No markings, no name. Just sitting there waiting. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in bold black ink. "You are being watched. Stop now." I felt the air leave my lungs. My eyes darted up to the hallway camera. Was it even real? Or had they hacked into something much more invasive? I turned back to the room. The woman and the board member were watching me, waiting. "It's a warning," I said, handing the note to the woman. She barely glanced at it before pulling me back inside and slamming the door. "They know we have the documents. That means they know what comes next." I wasn't about to be intimidated. "Good. That means we've got them scared." The board member let out a nervous laugh. "No. That means you don't understand how deep this goes." He hesitated, then rubbed his face as if debating whether to tell us the next part. "You think this is just about money? About Karen? You're wrong. There's something else tied to this HOA. Something older." A chill ran down my spine. "Older?" He nodded. "Do you know why this neighborhood was built the way it was?" Why every house had to follow such strict guidelines. I frowned. Because the HOA is run by control freaks? His eyes darkened. No. Because of the original deed. The one no one talks about. The woman stiffened. You're talking about the covenant. The board member nodded. I'd heard whispers of it before. A document buried so deep in HOA history that most people assumed it was a myth. Some old legal loophole that forced all homeowners to abide by unspoken rules. Rules that went beyond fines and lawn regulations. The original landowners, the board member said, lowering his voice, never gave up their claim. They just changed how they controlled it. The HOA was never about maintaining property values. It was about keeping their control alive. And if you break the wrong rule, one that isn't in the handbook but still exists. I swallowed hard. Then what? His face went pale. Then you disappear. The woman stepped forward. That's why they don't care about Karen. She was just a distraction. The real power isn't the board or the HOA president. It's the ones pulling the strings from behind the scenes. And they've been doing it for a long, long time. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. Check your front door. A lump formed in my throat. I turned to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see outside. There, sitting on my doorstep, was a single black key. A key I had never seen before.